go for it.
All right. Welcome back to Navigating the Work Compass. I'm Kate Luzio, founder and CEO of Luminary, along with my co-host, Susan Chapman Hughes.
Hello, everyone.
We are so excited to have another Luminary member today, old school OG Jennifer Silva, who is, amongst other things, the president of Berlin Cameron and the founder of LLShe. We'll learn a little bit about both of those roles that she plays. She's also a phenomenal working mom of two and is one of the best connectors I have ever met and a fierce advocate for women and women founders and all things women in the workforce. So Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that me being an OG doesn't necessarily mean that I'm old.
No.
You were just original, definitely not.
Yes, the original. Yes,
so good. Original, good just like Susan. So we're going to get into some incredible research that Berlin Cameron commissioned with some partners, including Hello Sunshine and Fair Play and others. But before we do that, Jen, can you give a little bit of your background on your day job, but then kick us around this study around women and the exhaustion gap?
Yes, thank you. So I run an advertising agency for WPP under the VMLY&R family called Berlin Cameron. And a few years ago in 2017, I started a division called LLShe that works with women-led and women-loved brands. And ever since then, I've been just super passionate about really understanding what women want and what women need and how we're culturally being perceived and what we're feeling at the time. And it's also just been a tremendous passion for me to think about women, not just in my job, but in my personal life. And so in 2019, it was in March, I was on the elliptical where I have my best ideas. I decided to do something to give back to women and connect 4 women a day for that entire month for Women's History Month. And what I found was it opened my network, it opened the network of other women, and it was truly phenomenal. So I then invited other women to connect as well, and it was called Connect for Women. And since then, I've connected over 2,000 women personally, and my network has connected over 5,000 women, and it's pretty awesome. This month I'm doing 40. I surpassed my goal in making 40 connections for women. And it's just always the notion of the magic that comes from the connection, the opportunity that could be out there, the partnership, the friendship, the whatever, and then potentially hearing about that magic that came out of it. It's almost like being a matchmaker. I really love it. So that's something I'm really passionate about. But recently, I found, and I was talking to one of, how we have these power groups, and I was in one of my power groups, and I found myself talking about, we had this opportunity to say what we need from each other. And I said, well, I don't have anything that I need right now, but I have to admit something. I feel really guilty about something. I've been binge watching every night, whether it be in the bathtub or whether it be in my bed. And that's really all I've been having the energy to do. And I just find myself depleted right now. And after I got off the call, I was so embarrassed that I shared with these executive women that I was binge watching underneath the covers, underneath the bubbles, whatever it was, because that's not typically me. I used to have this boundless energy, always fueled. I had a bag ready for anything, to go out with the ladies, to go to the gym, to get home to the kids. I was always that spontaneous person. But since recently, I've been feeling this way. And I did a session with Eve Radisky, who wrote Fair Play and Find Your Unicorn Space. And it really inspired me because she had done some research, some qual research with 500 women, and found that, women were really feeling this way right now, that they had felt that they had lost their creativity and inspiration. And so I said, Eve, for Women's History Month, let's go out and do some research to find out if this is really impacting women in a large scale way. So with Kantar, as well as Luminary and Hello Sunshine and Fair Play, we set out to do some research. We did 1,000 women and men, actually, so we could understand the comparison from the UK and the US to really understand this exhaustion gap, and were other women feeling this way as well as I was. And it may seem obvious. Actually, I got some comments in my LinkedIn post when I was sharing the data. Well, duh, Jen, we're all feeling this way. Did you really need to go out and do this research to prove it? And I think us opening up this dialogue, and even when I opened up this conversation with Eve, I found that I almost lifted this weight off myself just by realizing it and knowing other women felt this way too. And then we could trade secrets on binge watching as well. Kate and I do that sometimes. So
I got to get in on that one.
yeah.
So
yeah, that's really where it started.
And like you said, a lot of the statistics that came out of this research were not necessarily surprising, but I think the fact that no one was really talking about it, we hear this term burnout all of the time. Susan and I were catching up this morning, and I said, no, what's really great about this is that we're framing this around the exhaustion gap. And obviously, and Susan and I have spent many episodes talking about the fact that the disproportionate impact of the she session, the Great Resignation, all of that on women. Jen, you and I were talking about this when it first started and did a bunch of research. But some of the statistics that came out, and I'm just going to read it. 66% of women have felt burnout in the past 7 days, not the past 2 years, the past 7 days. 50% of women are likely to ask for help if they feel burnout, but that means the other 50 aren't. And so some of this research, yes, was not necessarily surprising, but the fact that it's now on paper. Susan, I know we've talked just about the load on women over this past couple of years. Would love to get your thoughts on the research as well.
Yeah. So first of all, it's really great that you did the research, right? I've been in, as everybody's opening back up, they're like, come to this event, please come see this thing or whatever. And I've been in so many rooms where leaders, whether they be corporate directors, the board directors, or CEOs, are like, yeah, our culture is that we want people back in the office. Mm-hmm. And it's so great because everybody's coming back to the office. And I was actually in one conversation where they said, in our New York office, we have about 70% of the people who've come back to the office, and that's really great. In our California office, it's only been like 30, and that's really bad. I literally was like, right? And so as the conversation went on, I raised the point of the number of women that have stepped out of the workplace, right? That have dropped out, who've said, you know what, I for whatever reason, I just can't take it. I have childcare issues, whatever. But when I saw this research, it actually made me feel like that this is the number one reason why, or at least one of the top 5, why women are just saying, you know what, I'm not interested in doing this. Some of the statistics that we got as part of this other event that I went to, this Goldman Sachs dinner, they talked about the fact that savings rates are at an all-time high, right? And so people, because they haven't been spending, have been saving their money, and it's given them a lot more flexibility and the willingness to actually maybe take a chance to say, I'm exhausted and I'm not doing this anymore. Whereas other people may not have had that. Now, I know there's probably a big differentiation between office workers and people who are frontline workers, but I think even frontline workers are tired and exhausted, and you're seeing that in the amount of churn and attrition that is happening within their businesses.
Yeah.
And so, the first thing I want to say is like, I applaud you for doing the research, because I don't know that everybody believes these statistics, right?
Yeah.
You talked about the fact that when you said it, a lot of people around you were like, duh. And like, actually, I think there's still a whole lot of people out there who don't get the duh, right?
Right.
Who aren't seeing it. And so being able to quantify and to put this on paper is really awesome. I also think it's also interesting that, Kate, when you talk about the statistics of 50% of the women are unlikely to ask for help.
It's actually 67 of women
67.
feel isolated and don't feel like they have anyone to ask for help. And then 50% are unlikely to ask for help. I mean, 67 feel isolated. I mean, that's just like shocking to me but
it also says that there's a very big disconnect between what they think women want versus what women actually want and need. And I also find it fascinating when you layer that up against women's role in buying decisions as consumers the fact that you've got this whole disaffected group of people who are like rolling their eyes and are like, I'm tired and I just want to binge watch. By the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with binge watching. I think you got to have the opportunity to like let your brain go somewhere else just on a regular basis. So if there's nothing else we learn from this, ladies, recognize that self-care does include binge watching. So we're just going to call
it does. Yeah. And actually the research shows that was one of the top increases. It was one of the things that people turned to, right? So there was more wine, sleeping aids. The top thing was actually binge watching,
yes.
Which actually made me feel slightly better. But you know what? One of the things that I found interesting is actually the 25 to 34-year-old demographic was affected the most. And they were the most burnt out, the most exhausted. And it's interesting because when we went to do the study, I said to Kantar, well, maybe we should consider removing the younger group because they're less likely to be parents. And they said, no, we want to do it with the census data, and, you know, kept me on track. But I actually thought that they would have more energy. I'm 45 years old. And I thought, you know, it's my demo that's really the most affected, but it's the younger women that are actually more affected than I am. And that's something that, you know, as a leader that we actually need to think about even more, because I actually wasn't thinking about that. I thought, you know, it's the people that surround me in my group versus like, this is actually impacting the younger generation way more than it's impacting me.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, you dissect it, it probably is one of the first times they've had a real struggle, right? And so, you know, in your first time out, I mean, we had recessions that we've had to live through. We've had periods of joblessness. Like we've all kind of like, if you're over 45, you've had to live through some of that. You've had to live through some kind of strife. But for a lot of the younger ones, they have never had that before, right? You had an economy that was just like cooking and cooking and cooking. And in 2008, they were still like babies. And so this is like the first time that they probably had to deal with it. And boy, what a doozy, right? Because like, there's no script for how you actually navigate through COVID. Some people think it's just get back to normal. Other people are like traumatized for life. And I don't think that many corporations have figured out how they're going to deal with the mental health aspects of what's going on with people. Yeah. But I'm wondering, Jen, as you like, you know, have looked at this research and just reflecting on your own perspective, like, okay, so we have the numbers. What do we do with it?
Right. Well, one of the things.
Before you go, I want to add that one thing to Susan, because I think it'll dovetail also into what Susan asked. Because when Susan mentioned all of these, you know, sitting, especially here in New York, you're out in LA, companies saying, come back, come back. We just had our mayor say, hey, companies, you got to get your people back in the office today. When you look at the study as well, and I won't get the numbers wrong, 26% of women feel somewhat less or much less motivated in their career. We also know 1 in 3 women haven't returned to the workforce that exited during the pandemic. And then when you look at 79% did not receive a promotion since the start of the pandemic, right? 66% didn't receive a pay or salary increase. 27% feel that their social circle has shrunk. Right. So all of these things, we talk about pay, we talk about networking and relationships, we're going back to work. So, you know, again, dovetailing off of what Susan, what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that's a great point. And actually, Kate, if you think about the flip side of the motivation side of things, the 26% feel less motivated. Actually, the research said that we may be exhausted, but we're still actually very motivated. 74% of women have either the same motivation or more motivation than before the pandemic overall. 76% of mothers have either the same motivation or more motivation in their careers, which I thought was great. Yeah. And 77% of mothers have the same or more motivation to do things for themselves. And that comes out to 35% more motivated to do things for themselves. So Susan, that kind of answers your question, is self-care and us thinking about how to take interest in our own lives again. And so many of the moms that I talk to sometimes tell me that they feel like they're kind of above themselves, like looking down on their lives and not really an active participant. You're just like kind of going through the day, but you're not really there in the moment. And it's because we're not taking enough time to devote to our own our own inspiration and our own creativity. I would highly recommend that everyone read Eve's book, because I think that that's like
Yes.
an amazing step in the right direction in terms of finding something that inspires you. And I think that that's what turned the light on in me, is like I felt like I found my creativity again. And when we find this time for ourselves, 40% of people feel relieved, 25% of people feel inspired, 24% feel more creative, 20% feel more connected. So it's like when you find this joy within yourself, you have means to connect with others, you have things to talk about, you have this inspiration. So trying to find those little things that spark joy in your life. And it's not necessarily like, my husband was like, Jen, you maybe should just go find a hobby. And like, I love my husband, he's really great, but I'm like, a hobby? That's another thing that I have to do on my list. Like, I don't want a hobby. I just want this like little thing that brings me joy and sparks me again. And truly, I think one step is that with Eve's books. And I think from a corporate perspective, is finding these ways to think about that time from a corporation and have fun with each other, and like take out from the day of like just the productive time, and spend time together. A lot of people are changing up the workplace dynamics. It's not just about that, it's a place to connect. And I think that is great, not necessarily mandate that you go there for work, but find these connections and inspiration points and creativity points. I think are very inspiring.
Yeah, we got a comment here from Courtney. And she says, I'm as a 33-year-old mom of 4, 2 being home all day and trying to navigate changing into the tech industry, but still not making enough for childcare or a nanny to help. I'm so grateful to work remotely, but I think as a woman, we face such different challenges. I'm looking at working a second job so that I can just have some help. And so, Courtney, first of all, you're not alone. I think there are a lot of people out there who feel the same way. And I think, if there's kind of like a frustration meter, you all are probably way more frustrated than we are. And we're pretty frustrated. And so, Jen, I'd love to just, hear some creative ways you think companies can help. Well, obviously paying a living wage is like important, but, Courtney's talking about trying to transition into a new industry while managing all of this stuff. Any ideas for her on how she can think about doing that and still find some joy?
Well, I think there's several things. One is in the research that we asked, like what people want from their bosses. And actually I found this really interesting because what they said surprised me. I thought it would be flexibility, more time off, increased wage. It was actually to be recognized for unpaid and invisible labor that we do within the workplace. And so I think that's like,
say that again, say that one more time.
It's to be recognized for the unpaid and invisible work that we do in the workplace. And actually it wasn't the number one in the home, which surprised me. The number one in the home was help around the house. And then the second was to be recognized for this unpaid labor that we're doing. And funnily enough, men's number one at home was they're happy with the way things are.
I guess so.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a really important thing. Like, how can we start to recognize, like thinking about ERGs, thinking about training, going back to Courtney's point, like training her to do other things, maybe at her own company or, somewhere else. Those types of things, to help people pay for them, to recognize that they're trying to advance their careers. In commitment to ERGs as well, paying people to be in ERGs, paying leaders to lead ERGs, all of that, like paying and appreciating that unpaid and invisible work that we're doing. From Courtney's perspective, in terms of like what all the stuff that she's balancing, I mean, that's so much stuff on your plate, and I commend you. I think there's some amazing programs out there actually that are starting to upskill and put people back. And maybe Kate, you probably have lots, because a lot of people have turned to entrepreneurship during this time. I know VMLY&R has like an amazing program called Dear Black Talent that's helping talent get into our workforce and training people on what types of roles you could do in advertising and how to take your skills and think about them differently. And the one other thing that I would say is like, maybe you already have the skill set. It's just a way to position your skills to sell yourself for that job, right? You don't need to check every single box. of the qualifications, just think about what you're good at and how to sell that to an employer in terms of what they're asking for you to do.
Yeah, I think so much of it is the story, right? Whether you're positioning yourself in a new industry, a new role, it's creating that story around your value, your reputation, your results, all of those things, as well as, really tapping into your network and your relationships to make those calls for you and make those introductions. Jen, I want to go back to one thing you said. I think companies are trying to figure it out, right? So we've got the Great Resignation, and not every woman can go and leave and become a business owner. It's just not realistic, right? 50% of the workforce is still women, right? And we want that. We need to keep and retain women in the workforce, is what all of these companies struggle with. I think creating capacity is an issue. So Luminary, obviously, as you know, including Burling Cameron, works with so many companies, right? And so whether that's investing in a corporate membership or different workshops or training and development, the challenge still remains for women is this being able to have capacity to do it all. That whole thing, like, I want to be the go-to, I tell people, forget that. The minute you become the go-to for free, they will take advantage forever, right? So whether you're paying your Gs, whether it's, again, looking at compensation across the board. I'll give you, Susan and I love to share anecdotes. Last week, I will not say the company's name. We've been talking to a company about working with their women, and they wanted us to support 200 women through Luminary. And they said our budget is $5,000.
What?
Yes.
Did they do the math? Just dividing 5,000?
Yes. I did the math.
That's like lunch.
No, and that's for a year.
It is lunch. It may be one cocktail.
And I had to laugh. I said, "Is this?" I have the email. I said, "Is this a joke?"
Wow.
And I said, "That is this is where companies are getting it wrong, right?" So whether you're creating flexibility, you're creating new program, whatever that is, you actually have to fund these things. And when you think about the last 2 years, how much money companies have saved, right? And yet we're still hearing we don't have T&E, we don't have bullshit, right? I mean, sorry, LinkedIn, but I'm just using curse, but that we have got to start calling out companies when we're not seeing it. So
I was watching CNBC this morning, and I can't remember which CEO was, but he was like, I think that people are not, it was the CEO of Restoration Hardware. And he was like, I think the problem that we're facing right now is inflation is like so out of control. And so basically consumers and employees are going to pay for it because, companies are, in order to deal with it, are going to just have to be less profitable or charge more. And I literally was like sitting there like a little bit mortified for him, because I'm like, you're going to have to invest more in your business and in things like this if you want to be able to grow and keep moving forward. And I don't think it's a binary choice. I don't think it's a choice of like, oh, do we just have to keep the same bottom line? Obviously you have to manage the street. You've got to do what you've got to do. But realistically, this is the place where I think a lot of companies are going to get it wrong, right? Because they're going to rely on their traditional infrastructure and organizational structures to try to navigate through very new problems and new opportunities to transform their workplace. I'd love, Jen, if you do you think of anything that's creative? I mean, I was looking at one of these other stats here that blew my mind. Oh yes, Daisy's book is awesome, right? I bought 25 copies so I could share with people. This 40% of women never or rarely do something just for them and spend 60% of their week doing things for others.
Yes. It's not, and that's happening in the workplace too, right? We're not doing that. We're more like we're putting ourselves last, and we're more likely to do productive tasks instead of things for others, which I get it, because you're trying to check everything off your to-do list, right? But we know that when we do give back to ourselves, that it actually rewards on all sorts of ends. I've been thinking that about from a corporate perspective, like, we are client based, we're, client service, right? How could we work in the ERGs and this time actually into our fees? Because I think it's really important. And actually that company wants us to have that knowledge and find that space and have those discussions to then, be able to bring that back to them and their leadership and their thinking, because it's not just about external communication. Internal communication these days is external communication, right? And so it's all so intertwined that we need to be thinking about that. And that's something that actually in a couple of pitches recently, I've been trying to actually reframe the way that we're looking at our budgets and actually ask clients to consider that within the budget, so that then it's easier for us as a business. Obviously we're giving to it anyway, but like actually feeling like it's paid for too. I think.
Do you feel like your clients are asking for more diversity on the teams that serve them, and more people that are reflective of their customer base?
Definitely. I've seen a huge, it's actually like a very important thing in terms of the team that's pitching. It's important in terms of the team that's actually servicing the business. And hopefully those two things are the same, right? Yep. But I think I've seen up to a 60% diverse team recently, which is a big ask, right? And I won't say what client that was, but we're definitely seeing it across the board. And it's very important.
Because it's interesting is as clients and customers are asking for more of this, and they're doing it because their customers are becoming more and more diverse,
right?
They want to reach more people. They're not doing it because they're benevolent. Well, maybe they are on some of them, but
right.
What's fascinating to me is, to your point, it's not free. Number one, right?
Right.
But number two, it is an amazing retention tool to invest in these activities, ERGs right. and others, for people who are of color, who are feeling isolated, who are feeling separated. That's actually one of the few places that they can go and feel seen and valued if they're not feeling that in their business. But it still strikes me that so many companies still underinvest in those organizations, or they ask them to do the work of the business, which I also think is problematic, right? So, I mean, the reality is like, I think of ERGs like as a safe space for people to go to create community and support for them, not to do the work of the company.
Right. Yeah. I think you have to have both, right? You have to have that internal driver, a commitment from leadership to create change. The ERGs are necessary as well to spark up the dialogue, create the community and everything. And I think it's important. Actually, Daisy, when she was writing this book, her and I had a call, and she asked me about Connect for Women and how I was ensuring that the women in Connect for Women were diverse. And I said, well, it's open to anyone. And she's like, Jen, that's not good enough.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I'm doing this out of my goodness of my own heart, Daisy. And she's like, but it's still not good enough. You need to make sure that the women, it's not just a circle of white women looking back at each other, that we are bringing other women into that fold. And it's actually in the book, the story. I haven't gotten to it yet. I'm like dying to see how she positioned it. But I really appreciated it. And it made me think about it so much differently. And it really helped me to think about the programming, to think about how we were bringing people in, how we were connecting people. So I'm really glad that she called me in.
There's so many people, Jen, who don't listen. And so if there's one thing that, folks can take away from this conversation is be like Jen, like take the feedback, listen, because inclusion, a lot of people talk about DE&I, right? The diversity, equity, and inclusion. The inclusion part is really hard. Because a lot of people just don't feel included and they don't feel valued. But listen, we could talk about this forever, but we're almost at time. So Kate, I know you want to bring this thing home. So let's do that.
Yeah, I think Jen, one, incredible foresight to do this research, right? Bringing us Luminary involved in it. But I think this idea of whether it's the exhaustion gap, diversity and belonging, inclusion, everything has to be super intentional and purposeful, right? We continue for many of us to talk in an echo chamber, right? And we've got to make sure, like Eve is doing, like Daisy, we had Daisy on Gold Digger last week. She also spoke at Luminary with the book last week. I think we have to also make sure that the white men are part of this conversation and listening. So,
Yeah.
I mean, my last kind of is like, let's get all the women on board, all of the women of color, but we've got to get these white dudes that are listening, because they're still predominantly the leaders in these organizations, and they're still the main decision makers. So, any sort of, where can we find you? I know you're super active on LinkedIn. Where can they find more about this study?
Yep. You can find more about the study on the Berlin Cameron website. We have it on our research tab. It's also on the Luminary research tab as well. Our partner, so that where I'm going to continue to publish on this and keep talking about it, because I think it's really important for people to know, how women are feeling at this time. And this study, I just want to point out, that was done as the pandemic was, and it's not over yet, but as we were all going back into the world. So it wasn't when we were at the height of the pandemic. It was done very recently. So I think it's important to know that we're still exhausted.
Yes.
And that we need to take that into account, and that burnout is at an all-time high right now with women and men. Actually, it was men were just as high in a lot of these points. And we need to, and as Daisy said, it's calling people in, right? It's not calling people out. That's a Daisy quote. I'm not taking it, but and I do it all the time. Like, well, have we thought about this? This team, we can't go to a pitch like this. This team isn't diverse enough. Or we need to make better hiring decisions, and like constantly calling that into the leaders of the company to make sure that we're really considering it and taking this into account and listening. I think the listening is huge. I had someone reach out to me from Africa recently about Connect for Women and how they could get involved. And that was like a question and a listening point for me. I have to figure that out. I don't exactly know. I'm going to figure out a great way. But I love that, right? And I love those people calling for connections and all of it. So you can find more information on Connect for Women on LinkedIn. There's two private groups, one for people looking for work and one for people just looking to connect. So one's called Connect for Women She-Covery Group, and one's called just Connect for Women. And then we also have an Instagram channel, and then Berlin Cameron, you can find us on the web.
Amazing. Jen, thank you so much for joining. More to come on the exhaustion gap. We'll keep you all posted. Tune in for the next episode of Navigating the Work Compass. And remember that we are on Apple and Google Podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Susan.
Jen. We'll see you all next time.
See you next time. Bye, Susan. Bye, Kate.